I tell you this now because there is no one left to punish me for speaking it, and because the silence has become more unbearable than any execution. They say confession cleanses the soul, that the Emperor's light burns away impurity through admission of sin. I have learned that confession is merely the last act of a dying animal, scratching meaning into the dirt before the void claims it. My name was Vasari Quelm. I was a Vox operator in the 3rd Tithe Fleet, stationed aboard the Endless Devotion, and I listened to prayers for 37 years. 37 years of voices calling out to him on terror, begging for salvation, for mercy, for acknowledgement. 37 years before I understood that the Vox channels between man and the Emperor carried nothing but our own desperate echoes, bouncing through the void until they degraded into static. The Endless Devotion was not a grand vessel. It was a bloated harvester ship, designed to drift through the pilgrim routes collecting tithes of prayer. Yes, you heard correctly. Prayer tithes. In the segmentum obscurus, certain cardinal worlds demanded not only material offerings but quantified devotion, measured, recorded, and transmitted to the ecclesiarchy's central data crypts on a quarterly basis. Someone in the administratum centuries ago had decided that faith could be audited like Prometheum shipments. My job was to sit in a Vox chamber the size of a coffin, headset clamped to my skull, and record the prayers transmitted from shrine worlds, pilgrimage ships, and penitent colonies. 10 hours a shift, 6 days a week, for 37 years. The metal walls of my station were covered in tally marks I'd stopped counting after the first decade. The air smelled of recycled sweat, and the particular staleness that comes from breathing the same molecules over and over, filtered through ancient scrubbers that left a taste like copper and ash. The prayers came through in waves. During pilgrim season, the Vox would scream with overlapping voices, thousands of supplicants on dozens of worlds, all transmitting at once. My cogitator would attempt to separate and categorize them: prayers for healing, prayers for victory, prayers for the dead, prayers for forgiveness. Each prayer was supposed to be logged, assigned a reference number, and stored in the data holds for eventual review by ecclesiarchs I never met. The system was supposed to ensure that no faithful voice went unheard, that the Emperor's servants could identify trends in devotion, track the spiritual health of entire sectors. It was supposed to matter. I believed it mattered once. I wore my headset like a priest wears his rosarius. I fasted on prayer days. I recited the operator's litany before each shift. I am the Emperor's ear. I am the conduit of faith. I transmit devotion and receive his grace. I meant every word. The changes started small, subtle enough that I convinced myself I was imagining them. During my 8th year aboard the Endless Devotion, I began noticing discrepancies in the prayer logs. Certain transmissions would arrive garbled, their words nonsensical, as if the Vox itself had corrupted them mid-transit. A prayer for safe childbirth would arrive as a string of numbers. A litany for the dead would transform into what sounded like machinery grinding. I reported these incidents to my supervisor, Engincia Vrel, a hunched man more mechadendrite than flesh. He barely looked up from his own terminal. Vox corruption, he said, his voice a mechanical rasp. Standard degradation over distance. The Omnissiah's signals decay like all matter. Mark them as corrupted and continue. I did as instructed. I marked them as corrupted, but the corruptions increased. By my 10th year, entire shifts would pass where more prayers arrived broken than intact. I would hear a voice begin, clear, desperate, a mother begging for her child's life, and then it would fracture, as if something was interfering with the transmission. Sometimes the voice would layer over itself, the same words repeating at different speeds until they created a droning harmony that made my teeth ache. Sometimes the prayer would reverse mid-sentence, playing backward, words becoming alien sounds. I started keeping a personal log of these incidents, scrawled on parchment I hid beneath my cot. I don't know why I bothered. Perhaps I needed evidence that I wasn't going mad. Perhaps I was already documenting my own descent. The smell in my Vox chamber changed around year 12. I cannot describe it precisely. It was not the usual human staleness or machine oil reek. It was something sweeter, like incense left to burn too long, turned from sacred to sickly. It clung to the inside of my nose, coated the back of my throat. I reported it as a possible atmospheric contamination. The ship's maintenance servitors were dispatched. They found nothing wrong with the air recyclers. The smell persisted. Worse, it seemed to intensify during transmissions, particularly during those moments when a prayer would fracture and distort. I began to associate that sweet rot scent with corruption itself, as if the breaking of faith had an odor. By year 15, I stopped reporting the corrupted transmissions. There were too many. If I flagged them all, I would spend more time filling out error reports than actually recording prayers. My supervisors had stopped responding to my concerns anyway. The ship's routine had calcified around us. We performed our duties because we had always performed them, because the administratum said we must, because stopping would be heresy. I sat in my coffin station, headset humming against my skull, and I listened to the prayers break. I listened to voices calling out to the Emperor and receiving only static. I listened to hope dissolving into noise. It was during year 18 that I first heard the response. Not from terror, not from the Emperor, from something else. I was recording a transmission from a plague world in the Corva system. Millions of dying faithful, their prayers a constant scream for deliverance. The transmission was unusually clear that day. I could hear individual voices in the chaos, could pick out words, mercy, Father, help, please. And then, beneath them, another voice, deeper, slower, speaking in a language I did not recognize but somehow understood. It said, "He does not hear you. He has never heard you. We do." I tore the headset off. My hands shook. The Vox chamber was empty except for me and the machines. The cogitator screen showed normal transmission data, prayer volume within expected parameters, signal strength adequate, no indication of external interference. I put the headset back on. The voice was gone. The plague world's prayers continued, desperate and unanswered. I told myself I had imagined it. 37,000 hours in a metal coffin, listening to suffering. Of course my mind would conjure phantoms. I filed the day's report and said nothing. But I began listening differently after that. I began waiting for the voice to return. And it did. Not every shift, not predictably, but often enough. Always during moments of peak desperation, when the prayers were most fervent, most genuine. The voice would slip between the words like oil between gears, subtle and invasive. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it laughed, sometimes it simply observed, its presence a cold weight pressing against my thoughts. I started to understand that the corruption I had been witnessing, the fractured prayers, the reversed words, the overlapping echoes, was not random degradation. It was attention. Something was listening to the same prayers I was recording. Something was intercepting them. Year 23. The endless devotion received orders to adjust course toward the Gehenna cluster, where a series of shrine worlds were experiencing what the ecclesiarchy termed a crisis of faith. Translation: the prayers had stopped. 7 worlds previously among the most devout in the sector had gone silent. Our ship was dispatched to investigate, to restore Vox communication, to re-establish the prayer tithes. I remember thinking that we were being sent to fix a machine malfunction, that we would arrive, repair some damaged relay, and the prayers would flow again. I remember my naivety like a painful abscess, something that had to be lanced before healing could begin. We reached the first world, St. Margrave's Hope, after 3 months in the warp. The planet looked normal from orbit, city lights visible, orbital platforms operational, Vox traffic routine. But when we opened the prayer channels, there was nothing, not silence exactly. Silence implies the absence of sound. What we heard was presence without voice, like listening to someone breathe in a dark room. I sat in my station, headset pressed tight, and I felt the enormous weight of the planet below, millions of souls existing but not praying. The sensation was profoundly wrong, like watching a corpse continue to walk. They sent a delegation to the surface, confessors, tech priests, Arbeitsenforcers. I was not included. Vox operators do not leave their stations. We are the infrastructure, the invisible mechanism. I listened to their reports as they descended. The cities were functional. The people were alive, going about their routines, working, eating, sleeping. But the shrines were empty. The cathedrals echoed with abandonment. When the confessors attempted to lead prayers, the populace stared at them with blank, confused expressions, as if the concept of prayer had been excised from their minds. One confessor reported that when he invoked the emperor's name, a child asked him, "Who is that?" The delegation returned to the ship within 20 hours. 2 of the confessors were weeping uncontrollably. One tech priest had entered a catatonic state, his mechadendrites writhing in patterns his colleagues said were not part of any known machine language. The Arbeits reported no crime, no heresy, no visible corruption. Just the absence of faith, complete and total, as if it had evaporated like water under a cruel sun. The ship's captain, a woman named Harold, whose face I had seen perhaps 3 times in 23 years, convened an emergency conclave. I was summoned, me, a Vox operator, invited into the Strategium. I should have been honored. I was terrified. The Strategium stank of incense someone had burned to excess, trying to cover the fierce sweat of 30 senior officers. Harold stood at the center, her uniform crisp despite everything, her eyes carrying the weight of impossible decisions. She asked me directly, "Operator Quelm, in your monitoring of prayer transmissions, have you observed any precursor to this event, any indication that faith was degrading?" I opened my mouth to tell her about the corruptions, the voice, the feeling of being watched through the Vox. But I looked around the room and saw the confessors clutching their rosarii, the tech priests murmuring machine prayers, the officers gripping their sidearms as if weapons could kill what we were facing. These people needed to believe the system functioned, that the Emperor heard, that faith was eternal. If I told them what I knew, I would shatter something they needed to survive, so I lied. "No, Captain, the prayer flow from the Gehenna cluster was within normal parameters until cessation." She nodded, relieved. A lie was easier to process than truth. The conclave concluded that St. Margrave's hope had been subjected to Xenos influence, some alien psychic attack that had suppressed the population's faith. We would investigate the other 6 worlds, establish a quarantine if necessary, and report to the ecclesiarchy. The meeting dispersed. I returned to my coffin station and put on my headset. The voice was waiting. "You protected them from knowledge. How merciful, how futile." We visited 4 more worlds in the Gehenna cluster. Each was the same. Functional societies emptied of devotion, populations that had forgotten how to pray, that regarded the ecclesiarchy's servants with polite confusion, as if we were practicing an obscure hobby they couldn't quite grasp. On the 4th world, I made a discovery that I reported to no one. While monitoring the planetary Vox traffic, standard civilian communications, I detected patterns. Conversations would shift mid-sentence, speakers would pause inexplicably, and in those pauses I heard the voice. Not speaking to them exactly, more like speaking through them, using the gaps in their words as doorways. It was teaching them, I realized. Teaching them that prayers were unnecessary, that the Emperor was a myth, that faith was a burden they could discard. The 5th world was different. When we arrived, the prayer channels were active, but what came through was not prayer. It was screaming, endless, layered screaming, thousands of voices in perfect synchronization, like a choir trained in agony. I listened for 4 minutes before I vomited into the waste chute beside my terminal. The sound was not random. It had rhythm, structure, intention. Someone on the bridge ordered an immediate withdrawal. As we pulled away from the planet, I heard the voice clearly through the screaming. This is what prayer becomes when he finally listens. Are you grateful? Year 27. The endless devotion was recalled to the sector capital for reconsecration and spiritual audit. Translation: the ecclesiarchy had noticed our reports and decided we were contaminated. The ship went into lockdown the moment we docked. Confessors swept through every deck, performing blessings, interrogating crew members, burning prayer strips in every corridor. I was interrogated for 6 hours. They asked me what I had heard. I lied. I told them the prayers had been normal until the Gehenna incident. I told them I was faithful. I recited the litanies of devotion until my voice cracked. They marked me as cleared, though I saw the doubt in the lead confessor's eyes. He knew I was lying, but he lacked proof, and the ecclesiarchy deals in documentation as much as faith. During the reconsecration, they purged the ship's Vox archives, 70 years of recorded prayers deleted. The official reason was spiritual corruption of data. The real reason, I suspected, was that someone had reviewed the archives and found the same corruptions I had. Deleting the evidence was easier than confronting its implications. After the purge, they installed new cogitators, new Vox equipment, even repainted the prayer chambers. They tried to erase the past. But the voice remained. It had never been in the machines. It had been in the transmissions themselves, riding the prayers like a parasite in the bloodstream. We returned to duty, new routes, different worlds, same task. Record the prayers, quantify the faith, maintain the lie. But I had changed. I no longer wore my headset like a sacred object. I wore it like a prisoner wears shackles. Every shift became an endurance test, waiting for the voice to appear, wondering what it would say, fearing and anticipating it in equal measure. The other operators, there were 12 of us on the ship, began to avoid me. I had always been solitary, but now I was isolated. They could sense something wrong, even if they couldn't articulate it. Humans are good at detecting rot, even when it's invisible. Year 30. We were assigned to monitor a massive pilgrimage, 10 million faithful traveling from a hive world to a shrine planet, their journey taking 6 months through relatively stable warp routes. 10 million voices praying simultaneously, a tidal wave of devotion. My cogitator could barely process the volume. I sat in my station for 12, sometimes 14 hours at a stretch, logging prayers until my eyes bled from the screen's glow, until my ears rang with phantom voices even after I removed the headset. The prayers were beautiful in their way. Desperate, certainly, but genuine. People praying for sick children, for forgiveness of sins they believed were killing their souls, for strength to endure another day. And every one of those prayers went nowhere. They hit the Vox relays, got recorded in data crypts, and stopped. The Emperor did not hear them. I knew this with absolute certainty because the voice told me. Listen to them call, 10 million voices and not one answer. Do you know why? The voice was conversational that day, almost friendly. Because he is corpse-bound and rotting, and his attention is elsewhere. He maintains the Astronomicon, yes. He holds back the tide, yes. But he does not listen to prayers. He cannot. He has no capacity remaining for individual suffering. He is too vast, too fragmented, too dying. You know this. You have always known this. I tried to argue silently in my thoughts. I recited the catechisms the Emperor protects. The Emperor guides. The Emperor watches over his faithful. The voice laughed. Does he? Then why are you recording prayers in a machine for bureaucrats to quantify? If he heard, why would you need to log them? You are not his ear. You are a clerk, filing reports no one reads, serving a system designed to make humans feel heard without anyone actually listening. The pilgrimage reached its destination, a shrine world called Lacuna Sanctus, famous for its relic of St. Josmain's shinbone. 10 million pilgrims disembarked, crowded into the cathedrals and shrine complexes, and prayed with such fervor that the Vox channels overloaded. My cogitator shut down twice. The smell in my chamber, that sweet rot incense smell, became overwhelming. And beneath the prayers, beneath the 10 million voices, I heard other voices, older voices, hungry voices. The voice I had been hearing for years was not alone. It was part of a multitude, a vast congregation that pressed against reality wherever prayers were offered, waiting for faith to crack so they could pour through. Something happened on Lacuna Sanctus. The reports were confused, contradictory. Thousands of pilgrims collapsed simultaneously during a mass prayer service, not dead but catatonic, their minds simply gone. The ecclesiarchy blamed heat exhaustion, poor crowd management, contaminated water. But I knew. I had heard the crack as it happened, the sound of faith breaking under pressure, and I had heard the rush of something pouring in to fill the void. The pilgrims were not catatonic. They were occupied. Something else was looking through their eyes now. Year 33. I requested a transfer, denied. Essential personnel. I requested a leave of absence, denied. Wartime restrictions. I tried to quit. Heresy. The endless devotion had become my tomb, and I was being forced to haunt it. The other operators were struggling now too. I could see it in the way they emerged from shifts, their faces slack, their eyes unfocused. 2 of them started self-harming, cutting litanies into their arms with broken stylus nibs. Another stopped speaking entirely, communicating only through hand signs that no one else understood. The ship's Medicae prescribed sedatives and mandatory chapel attendance. The problems intensified. I began experimenting. During quiet shifts, when prayer traffic was low, I would adjust the vox frequencies, searching for something, anything that contradicted what I feared. I scanned for genuine divine signals, for evidence that somewhere, somehow, the Emperor was responding. I found only more voices. So many voices. They existed in the spaces between official channels, in frequencies just outside normal human hearing. They whispered, argued, promised, threatened. They had been there all along, I realized. Humanity had been praying into a crowded room for 10,000 years, surrounded by entities eager to answer, while the figure we addressed sat silent and rotting on his throne. Year 35. An inquisitor arrived on the ship. No warning, no explanation. Inquisitor Markov, a thin woman with augmetic eyes that clicked when they focused. She interviewed every Vox operator privately. When my turn came, I told her everything. I broke down in her presence, words pouring out like blood from a severed vein. The corrupted prayers, the voice, the entities waiting in the frequencies, the certainty that our devotion was feeding something other than the Emperor. I expected execution. I expected her to draw her bolt pistol and end my heresy with a single shot. Instead, she listened. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You are not the first operator to report this phenomenon. You will not be the last. Your observations have been noted." She stood to leave. "What does it mean?" I asked. "If the Emperor doesn't hear prayers, what are we doing?" She paused at the door. "We are maintaining the Imperium, operator. Truth is a luxury. Faith is a tool. If humanity stopped praying, stopped believing, the entire structure would collapse in weeks. So we collect prayers, and we log them, and we create the appearance of divine attention. We give people hope, even if that hope is hollow. Because hopeless humans are useless humans, and the Imperium needs every human it has." She left. I sat in the interrogation cell for an hour before someone remembered to release me. That conversation should have destroyed me. Instead, it clarified everything. I understood my purpose now. I was not a conduit of faith. I was a stagehand, maintaining the illusion that the play of imperial divinity mattered. The Emperor was dead, or dying, or too far beyond humanity to care about individual suffering. The prayers I recorded helped no one except the bureaucrats who tallied them, and the lost souls who needed to believe someone was listening. And the things that actually were listening, those entities in the static, fed on the faith we offered like scavengers on a corpse. Year 37. My last year, though I did not know it yet. the endless devotion was assigned to a new route through the Gothic sector, an area experiencing heightened warp instability. The prayers coming from that region had always been intense, worlds besieged by Xenos, systems ravaged by plague, populations clinging to faith because they had nothing else. Now the prayers had become frantic, a constant scream for salvation that never came. I sat in my station and listened to worlds die. I heard prayers from a hive city as its atmosphere ignited. I heard prayers from a troopship as it was boarded by things the soldiers could not name. I heard prayers from a cathedral as its walls melted around the faithful, and I heard the voices in the static, celebrating. The ship itself began to change. Crew members reported hearing whispers in empty corridors. Servitors malfunctioned, their binary cant shifting into phrases that sounded almost like laughter. The Geller field flickered during warp transit, and during those flickers, people saw things. Shadows that moved wrong. Figures standing in impossible places. Rooms that had too many corners. The ship's confessor led hourly prayer services, his voice growing hoarse, his hands trembling as he raised the aquila. It did nothing. The whispers continued. I stopped sleeping. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant the voice would speak without the buffer of the Vox equipment. It would speak directly into my mind, showing me things. I saw the Emperor on the golden throne, not as the propaganda depicted, a stern father watching over humanity, but as a desiccated corpse held together by machines. His consciousness shattered into a million fragments, each fragment screaming in silent agony, none of them capable of coherent thought or compassion. I saw the Astronomicon not as a beacon of hope, but as a death rattle, the last spasm of a dying god. I saw Terra itself, not as the sacred cradle of humanity, but as a mausoleum, a planet-sized grave marker for a species too stubborn to admit it was already dead. During my final shift, I received a prayer from a world I did not recognize. The transmission was clean, unusually so, given the warp storms in the region. A single voice, a woman's, speaking clearly. Emperor, if you can hear me, if you have ever heard any of us, please send a sign. We are dying. Our children are starving. The Xenos are at our walls. We have been faithful. We have served. We have given everything. Please, just a sign, just one. The prayer ended. I waited. The cogitator logged the transmission. The data crypt stored it. Nothing else happened. No response, no miracle. The woman's world would fall, her children would die, and her faith would be rewarded with exactly nothing. I began laughing. I could not stop. The sound echoed in my coffin chamber, mingling with the static from the Vox, creating a harmony of despair and absurdity. 37 years. 37 years of recording prayers that went nowhere. Serving a system designed to exploit human suffering. Maintaining a lie so vast that its revelation would shatter civilization. I laughed until I wept, until the tears mixed with the blood from my bitten tongue, until the taste of copper filled my mouth like communion wine. The voice spoke one last time, not mocking, not triumphant, almost gentle. Now you understand. You have always been alone, all of you. Calling into the void, hoping the void cares. It does not. He does not. But we do. We have always listened. We have always answered. You need only stop praying to a corpse and acknowledge those who are actually present. I removed my headset. I looked at the tally marks on the walls of my station, thousands of them, each one representing a shift spent in service to a lie. I picked up the stylus I used for manual data entry, a crude metal spike worn smooth by decades of use. I began carving new marks into the wall, but these were not tallies. These were words. The Emperor does not hear. The Emperor has never heard. We are alone. We have always been alone. I carved until my hand cramped, until the stylus broke, until the wall was covered in truth. They found me the next morning, collapsed in my station, the words bleeding down the metal walls. I was deemed unfit for duty, a diagnosis 13 years too late. They transferred me to the ship's Medicaid ward, a sterile white room where they pumped me full of sedatives and forced me to attend re-education sessions led by a confessor who smelled like fear. He made me recite the Imperial Creed. He made me pray. I complied. I spoke the words, but I no longer meant them, and I think he could tell. Faith is like virginity. Once lost, it cannot be authentically reclaimed, only mimicked. The endless devotion continued its duties. The remaining Vox operators took over my shifts. Life aboard the ship continued because it had to, because stopping would mean confronting what I had carved into that wall, and confronting it would mean admitting that the entire structure of Imperial faith was a performance, a collective delusion agreed upon to avoid the horror of cosmic indifference. I was eventually transferred off the ship. Not discharged. The Imperium does not discharge personnel who know too much. I was assigned to a reclusium on a remote moon, a place where troubled servants of the faith are sent to recover their spiritual health. Translation: a prison for those who have seen too much and cannot be trusted to remain silent. I share my quarters with a former missionary who will not stop washing his hands, a tech priest who believes the omnicia is a lie told by machines to enslave humanity, and a guardswoman who survived something on a death world that she can only describe as the Emperor's true face. We do not discuss our experiences directly, too dangerous even here, but sometimes in the night cycle, when the reclusium servitors have powered down and the monitors in our cells are temporarily offline, we whisper to each other through the ventilation grates. We share fragments of what broke us. The missionary tells us about a world where prayers were answered, but the answers came from something wearing the Emperor's name like a costume. The tech priest describes discovering data files in a Forge World's archives that proved the omnicia was a retconned fabrication created by Martian priests to justify their power. The guardswoman describes looking into a warp rift and seeing the Emperor's consciousness scattered and screaming, unable to save anyone, not even himself. And I tell them about the prayers, about 37 years of listening to humanity call out to a God who cannot answer, and about the things that answer instead. I tell them about the voice in the static. I tell them the truth that the Inquisitor confirmed the Imperium knows, the Ecclesiarchy knows. They know that faith is theater, that prayer is a pressure valve to prevent human despair from igniting into rebellion. They know, and they continue, because the alternative, admitting the Emperor is effectively dead, would destroy everything. Sometimes I wonder if the Imperium is itself a prayer, a civilization-sized plea for meaning in an uncaring universe. We pray to the Emperor. The Ecclesiarchy prays to the system prays to its own perpetuation, and all of us are desperate for someone to hear, for something to care, for the universe to be less hostile than it is. But the universe does not answer prayers. It simply exists, indifferent and cruel, populated by entities that hunger for our faith, because it is the only thing we have that they cannot create themselves. The voice still speaks to me, even here. Not through Vox equipment, that was never necessary. It speaks through the humming of the Reclusium's generators, through the rhythm of my own heartbeat, through the silence between thoughts. It tells me that I could escape this prison, that I could be freed from suffering, that I need only accept what it has been offering all along, an answer. Not the Emperor's answer, not a benign answer, but an answer nonetheless, which is more than the Imperium has ever provided. I have not accepted. Not yet. Not because I believe the Emperor will save me. I know he will not. Not because I fear damnation. I am already damned by knowledge, which is more permanent than any sin. I resist because surrender feels too much like vindication for the voice, too much like proving its point. If I give in, if I stop praying to the corpse god and acknowledge the entities that actually listen, then my 37 years of faith were truly wasted, and I am not ready to admit that. Not yet. but I feel my resistance weakening. It weakens every time I hear another prayer through the reclusium's chapel walls, another desperate voice calling out to a God who will not answer. It weakens every time I remember the woman on that dying world, begging for a sign that never came. It weakens every time I realize that I am still here, still breathing, still conscious, and he has not ended my suffering despite 37 years of service. If the Emperor truly protected his faithful, I would not be in this cell. If he truly heard prayers, mine would have been answered long ago. The guardswoman asked me once during a midnight whisper session, "Do you think he ever heard? In the beginning, before the Golden Throne, before the heresy, do you think he ever actually listened to us?" I considered the question. I thought about 10,000 years of prayers, trillions upon trillions of human voices calling out across the galaxy, an ocean of faith poured into the void. And I thought about the Imperium's response, bureaucracy, quotas, prayer tithes, vox operators recording devotion for statistical analysis. I thought about the fact that the system treats faith as a resource to be harvested, not a sacred connection to be honored. "No," I told her, "I don't think he ever heard. I think we built a religion around a warlord, and when he was crippled, we were too invested in the lie to admit he was just a man. A powerful man, a genetically engineered man, perhaps even a good man in his own way, but not a god. Never a god. We made him divine because we needed divinity, and now we are trapped by our own creation, forced to keep praying to a corpse because admitting the truth would collapse the Imperium." She was quiet for a long time. "Then, but if he is not divine, if he never was, then what is the Imperium? What have we been serving?" "Each other," I said. "We have been serving each. Others need to believe that suffering has meaning, that sacrifice matters, that someone is watching and keeping score. The Imperium is not a nation. It is a mutual agreement to keep lying, because the truth that we are alone in an indifferent universe surrounded by predators and our only God is a 10,000-year-old corpse would drive us collectively insane." The ventilation grate carried my words away into darkness. No one responded. Perhaps they were considering what I had said. Perhaps they were praying despite everything, because prayer is an addiction and withdrawal is agony. I do not pray anymore. I stopped the day I carved the truth into my station wall. But sometimes, in the deep hours of the night cycle, I find my lips moving in familiar patterns, muscle memory reciting litanies I no longer believe. The body prays, even when the mind has abandoned faith. This too is a prison. I do not know how much longer I will remain in this reclusium. Years, perhaps, decades. The Imperium is patient with those it cannot kill and cannot release. Eventually, I suspect they will decide I am too dangerous to keep alive, that my knowledge is too corrosive to contain. An inquisitor will arrive, or perhaps just a servitor with a syringe, and I will be quietly disappeared, my name struck from records, my existence denied. This is how the Imperium deals with inconvenient truths. It buries them. But before that happens, I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to document what I learned, what 37 years of listening to prayers taught me. I have carved this account into the walls of my cell, using a broken piece of my cot frame, working during the night cycles when the monitors are offline. The words cover every surface now, thousands of sentences spiraling from floor to ceiling, a testament to faith's failure. Whoever finds this, if anyone finds this, will read the confession of a man who listened to humanity pray and learned that no one was listening back. The voice is laughing now. I can hear it through the walls, through the humming generators, through the silence. It is pleased with what I have written. It knows that doubt is contagious, that truth is a poison that spreads through contact. By documenting my realization, I have created a weapon against faith. Whoever reads these words will be infected with the same question that destroyed me. What if the Emperor never heard your prayers? What if you have been calling into the void for your entire life, and the void has been calling back, wearing his voice like a mask? I do not expect you to believe me immediately. Faith is resilient. You will rationalize, justify, explain away my words as heresy or madness. You will tell yourself that I was weak, that I lacked conviction, that I was corrupted by the very entities I describe. You will clutch your Aquila and recite the litanies of protection, and you will feel better for a moment. But the question will remain, lodged in your mind like a splinter. What if he is right? What if the Emperor does not hear? And once that question takes root, it cannot be removed. It will grow. Quietly at first, barely noticeable. But over time, over years of praying and receiving no answer, over decades of witnessing suffering that no God prevents, over a lifetime of serving a system that treats your faith as a resource to be exploited, the question will grow until it consumes everything. Until you too are carving truths into walls, trying to warn others, knowing that your warning is itself a form of damnation. This is my gift to you, my curse to you, the knowledge that I carry passed on like a plague. The Emperor does not hear your prayers. He has never heard your prayers. And the things that do hear are waiting patiently for you to realize this, so you will turn to them instead. This is the true horror of the Imperium. Not that we are ruled by a corpse god, not that we sacrifice millions daily to maintain a dying civilization, but that we do all of this while believing it matters, while believing someone is watching, while believing our suffering has meaning. It does not. It never did. We are alone. We have always been alone. And the voice in the static is laughing. I am done now. My hand aches from carving. The walls are full. There is no more space for truth. Perhaps that is fitting. Truth has always been constrained by available space in the Imperium, squeezed into margins and hidden in footnotes, while lies sprawl across entire libraries. I will stop writing now. I will sit in my cell and wait for whatever comes next. Execution, probably, or reassignment to some even more remote location, some forgotten asteroid where I can die quietly without contaminating anyone else with my knowledge. But before I stop, I want to say this. I do not regret my loss of faith. Faith was a comfortable lie, and I existed in it peacefully for decades. But truth, no matter how terrible, is preferable to ignorance. I would rather know that I am alone in an indifferent universe than believe in a God who watches my suffering and does nothing. At least in a godless cosmos, my pain is meaningless but not ignored. It simply exists without divine justification, without cosmic purpose. There is a strange comfort in that. My suffering does not need to mean anything. It can simply be and then stop being, and the universe will continue, indifferent as always. The Emperor does not hear your prayers, but I have heard mine echo back from the void, and in that echo I have heard my own voice, small and afraid and utterly alone. And that voice is more real, more true, more worthy of acknowledgement than any divine response I ever imagined. This is my testimony. This is my confession. This is the truth that 37 years of listening taught me. The Emperor never heard your prayers. But you did, and sometimes that has to be enough.